Tonight, it's a battle for every last vote to get health care reform through the Senate by Christmas recess. And his could be the last. I'm Katie Couric. Also tonight, health care winners and losers. The entire health industry stands to make a fortune, but people and politicians who wanted a public option probably won't get one. A town in turmoil after a Mexican immigrant is beaten to death by white teenagers, and 3 police officers are charged with a cover-up. And recognize this man? He's being honored with the largest mountain sculpture in the world.
This is the CBS Evening News with Katie Couric.
Good evening, everyone. It's a race against time now to get at least some version of health care reform through the Senate before Congress leaves town for Christmas. And they are oh so close tonight. Democrats are just one vote away from the 60 they need to block any filibuster. Nancy Cordes is on Capitol Hill tonight. And Nancy, who has that one vote and what will it take to get it?
Well, Katie, now that Joe Lieberman has come on board, the lone Democratic holdout is Ben Nelson of Nebraska. He wants abortion language in the bill that most of his party opposes.
Democratic leaders had just 2 words today to describe their urgent efforts to win Nelson over.
They continue.
The Midwestern senator is demanding a ban on abortion coverage for any woman who gets a tax credit to buy insurance. But even if they do reach a compromise with Nelson, Democrats face another obstacle, the calendar. Senate rules dictate that to pass a bill by the Christmas holidays, Leader Harry Reid must file the bill by Saturday. That means he has just 2 days left to decide once and for all what reforms are in it. And that's assuming Republicans don't blow up the calendar altogether by employing stalling tactics like they did today.
Section 1877H6.
When they required clerks to read a 767-page amendment
Section 1303.
out loud on the Senate floor for 3 hours.
7. Utilization and bonus information.
Democrats were predictably outraged.
I have in my hand a smoking tweet from Senator Jim DeMint. If Reid won't slow down this debate, we'll do it for him.
But many Democrats are even more frustrated with their own party and their president for caving, as they see it, to moderate demands that the public option be removed from the bill.
I don't think I've ever seen a national debate on a big issue like this where the president's kind of sat back and said, okay, whatever you guys decide up on Capitol Hill, we're going to go with.
Still, he and others are not prepared to take the advice of their former party chairman, Howard Dean. He's urging them to kill the bill and start over because liberals keep losing on big ideas. Like last night when an amendment to allow Americans to buy drugs from other countries was defeated.
The pharmaceutical industry flexes its muscles and defeats an attempt for fair prices, fair prescription drug prices for the American people so that we can keep paying the highest prices in the world.
Even if Senate Democrats get a bill passed by Christmas, the debate is far from over. The bill will have to be merged with a very different House bill, and then everyone will vote again. And that's a process, Katie, that's expected to take at least another month or more.
And Nancy, the White House has been pushing very hard for this Christmas deadline. Why is that so important?
Well, first of all, they don't want to run the risk that any Democrats change their mind over the holiday recess or get swayed by all those Tea Party protests. And then there's the fact that 2010 is an election year. By next year, many members' minds, frankly, will be elsewhere.
All right, Nancy Cordes on Capitol Hill. As always, Nancy, thank you. Now, in case you've forgotten, the original goal of reform was to make health care available to all Americans while holding costs down. As Nancy just said, we're still a long way from the end of this battle, but no matter what winds up in the final bill, Cheryl Atkinson tells us it appears one of the biggest winners will be the entire healthcare industry.
If success is measured by return on the dollar, the pharmaceutical industry made a killing. The industry spent $20 million lobbying on health care this year. What did they get?
30 million Americans are going to get health insurance subsidies from the federal government, and so 30 million Americans are going to buy a lot more drugs, and revenues for the drug companies are going to go through the roof.
Also putting pharmaceutical interests in the win column, the swift death of drug reimportation. It would have cost drug makers billions if Americans could buy cheaper drugs from Canada or Europe. Now they can't. The industry argued on safety grounds that it would be too hard for the FDA to police imported medicines. They even managed to flip their chief opponent, President Obama. Listen to what he said on the campaign trail.
We'll allow the safe reimportation of low-cost drugs from countries like Canada.
In the end, the president helped relegate reimportation to the scrap heap of discarded ideas. It was part of a deal he struck with the pharmaceutical industry. It agreed to give up $80 billion in revenue. The president agreed not to push for reimportation or certain price controls. Other big winners are the American Medical Association, hospitals, and insurance companies. They spent tens of millions of dollars lobbying on health care this year. That doesn't even count their aggressive campaign in recent days against Medicare buy-in. It would have allowed Americans as young as age 55 to buy into Medicare. But to providers, it could have meant lower payments for medical services all the way around. It's dead. Also dead, or very close, the public option. Losers on that issue include the president, Senate Majority Leader Harry Reid, and Speaker of the House Nancy Pelosi. The public option's demise is another win for insurance companies, which didn't want to compete with the government. And they'll get $447 billion worth of federal subsidies through customers given money to buy coverage, all of which, says Libertarian Michael Cannon, makes insurance companies the ones with the most to gain.
Every time government expands, somebody is getting rich. And the people who figured out how to get rich off of this expansion of government are the private insurance companies.
Winners would also include a certain number of uninsured, of course. How many we don't yet know, but perhaps 30 million or so. That's because they'll get substantial government subsidies to help them buy their own insurance. Katie?
Interesting and important report, Cheryl. Thank you so much. Now to Pennsylvania, where a small town is at the center of a hate crimes case. It began with the beating death of a Mexican immigrant last year. Now, two teenagers convicted in the attack are facing additional federal charges, and 3 police officers have been indicted for allegedly orchestrating a cover-up. Chief National Correspondent Byron Pitts is in Shenandoah tonight. And Byron, this must be devastating for this town of just 5,000 people.
Oh, Katie, that's right. The federal judge in this case has ordered the local police chief held without bail until this trial, in a case that has divided this town. As 25-year-old Luis Ramirez lay fighting for his life nearly 18 months ago, racial tensions in blue-collar Shenandoah, Pennsylvania came to light. For many, an emerging Mexican immigrant population was not welcome. After Ramirez died, former high school athletes Brandon Pierkarski and Derek Donchek were convicted of simple assault, but acquitted of more serious charges.
Where's Daddy?
The victim's fiancée and mother of his 2 children, Crystal Dillman, says the crime exposed an open secret.
They don't embrace other cultures, and if you're Hispanic in any way, they consider you a Mexican. It doesn't matter if you're from Mexico or not. You could be from Puerto Rico and they'll call you a dirty Mexican.
Federal prosecutors now say the killing was an act of intimidation and was racially motivated. Ramirez's death came after a late-night street fight where racial slurs were heard. After the fight, the teens were stopped by police. In a small town where connections run close, federal prosecutors say the police officers and the chief helped the assailants by filing false police reports that intentionally omitted information about the true nature of the assault, including telling defendants to dispose of evidence. Former Mayor Thomas O'Neill.
The chief is arrogant. They feel that they're a power unto themselves. They're not accountable to anyone.
The county's Hispanic population has grown more than 80% since 2000. Immigrants and anti-hate groups described an atmosphere of resentment and hostility.
I can't say it without sounding racist. I mean, I can't say, the Mexicans came here, now there's problems. I can't say that without sounding racist.
Shenandoah only had 7 police officers to begin with. Now, with nearly half the department under federal indictment, the state police will patrol the street. Katie, as for those 2 teenagers, if convicted, they could face life in prison.
Byron Pitts in Shenandoah, Pennsylvania tonight. Thank you, Byron. Meanwhile, in Brazil tonight, an American father's fight to win back custody of his son may be ending. A federal appeals court there ruled today that 9-year-old Sean Goldman must be turned over to U.S. officials in the next 48 hours. 5 years ago, Sean's mother took him to her native Brazil and filed for divorce. Then last year, she died, and her new husband retained custody of the boy. Tonight, his father hopes Sean will finally be coming home.
This is a very positive development, and thank God that these judges ordered him to come home again, and hopefully this time I will be bringing him back.
However, Sean's family in Brazil now plans to take their case to that country's Supreme Court. Turning to Iran, showing off its military muscle again today, the Iranians test-fired an improved version of their most advanced missile. They sent it straight up, and experts believe that was to avoid scaring neighboring countries. But this missile has a range of 1,500 miles, which means it could reach Israel and U.S. bases in the Persian Gulf region. And then there are the continuing tensions with North Korea. David Martin looks at what could happen if diplomacy fails when the CBS Evening News continues in a moment. President Obama is trying some personal diplomacy to get North Korea to resume negotiations over its nuclear weapons program. Administration officials confirmed today the president sent Kim Jong-il a letter last week. They did not reveal the contents. There is, of course, a long history of tensions between the U.S. and North Korea. David Martin looks at what could be the ultimate result of a failure of diplomacy in tonight's Eye on National Security.
A nighttime satellite photo of the Korean peninsula reveals the stunning gap between the modern South and the black hole that is North Korea. How can a country which can barely keep the lights on even think about starting a war?
If the North starts anything, the North loses, and I believe that firmly.
John Talleli believes that based on his 3 years as the commanding general of U.S. and South Korean forces.
If this were to happen, is this a short war or a long war?
I think it's a short war.
It would be a contest of mass. The North Koreans have 1 million men under arms against the technology and training of 28,000 American and 500,000 South Korean troops. But the North Korean advantage in numbers would be quickly overwhelmed by U.S. reinforcements and airstrikes from as far away as Guam or as close in as submarines off the coast. So what could the leaders of North Korea possibly hope to achieve in a war they know they cannot win?
Their hope is that they can make the war so painful to the United States and South Korea that we will not pursue it to the end.
Joseph Bermudez, who tracks the North Korean military for Jane's Defense Weekly, believes it would begin with a massive barrage by thousands of artillery pieces and rocket launchers, many of them capable of hitting the capital of Seoul, a sprawling megalopolis of 13 million people just 20 miles south of the DMZ.
They intend to employ chemical weapons, ballistic missiles, right from the very beginning. If they feel threatened enough, they might even go nuclear. We're not sure.
The U.S. has long since pulled its nuclear weapons out of South Korea. But the threat of retaliation against a nuclear or chemical attack still stands.
The United States has made it clear for many years that it reserves the right to respond with overwhelming force to the use of weapons of mass destruction against the United States, our people, our forces, and our friends and allies.
Even without nuclear weapons, a conventional war on the Korean peninsula would be horrific.
The consequences are extreme.
Extreme in casualties. I mean, what are we talking about here?
I would say it would be in the tens of thousands.
North Korea's artillery barrage would be met with an immediate counterattack by South Korean and American artillery and aircraft with precision-guided weapons. But North Korea's artillery is not an easy target. Much of it is dug into the sides of mountains.
They are able to open the doors, the blast doors, move out, fire a set number of rounds, and then return under cover.
North Korean tanks would come south through 3 corridors, one of them this north-south highway, all of them heavily fortified and mined with charges to collapse bridges and overpasses. Its infantry would come pouring through secret tunnels dug beneath the DMZ. Special operations forces would land in miniature submarines behind the front lines.
This combination is hoped by the North Koreans to totally throw off the defending forces and give them the opportunity to penetrate quickly and deeply. That's their hope.
Wars never go according to plan, but in the end, the South would win and the North would lose, and it would be a disaster for all sides. David Martin, CBS News, the Pentagon.
In Copenhagen today, protesters tried to storm the International Climate Conference, demanding firm steps to combat global warming. Police used clubs and pepper spray to break up the crowd. Inside the conference hall, negotiators failed to reach a deal on reducing greenhouse gases. They still hope to have one by Friday, when President Obama and more than 100 other world leaders arrive. And coming up next, Citigroup got billions in bailout money. So why is it now getting a giant tax break? The Federal Reserve today said the economy is growing again, but it's keeping interest rates at a record low, in part to encourage banks to lend money. As some of those banks pay back $245 billion in TARP bailout funds, Anthony Mason tells us one of them is getting a tax break critics call unfair.
As Citigroup began selling new stock to repay $20 billion in borrowed TARP money, the White House acknowledged today the bank was being let off the hook for billions in taxes.
The president comfortable with this tax break, or whatever you want to call it?
The IRS made that decision, and it allows Citigroup to pay back the United States the money that it was owed.
The IRS waiver allows Citigroup to get up to a $38 billion write-off against the money it lost in the crisis. The potential tax savings, several $1 billion.
It all seems to be a little bit of a counting sleight of hand, where the taxpayer yet again loses with this administration.
But all 9 of the country's major banks have now announced plans to pay back their TARP loans. Overall, the Treasury estimates taxpayers will make a $19 billion profit from interest payments. The White House has been anxious to get the government out of the financial industry and the banks back on their feet.
But the balance sheets of these banks are still impaired.
Analyst Paul Miller says the banks still hold billions of dollars in bad mortgage loans on their books. By one estimate, nearly 7 million mortgages are in trouble and could be headed for foreclosure.
The balance sheets still have a lot of losses in them, and it's going to take a couple years to fix those losses. So no, we're not completely out of the woods yet, but we're in a much better condition today than we were a year ago.
That's because the credit markets are moving again. But if mortgage losses were to suddenly surge in the next 18 months, banks could end up back in Washington looking for more help. Katie?
Anthony Mason. Anthony, thank you. In other news, if you have a computer, chances are there's an Intel product inside. Intel makes 80% of the world's central processors, the brains that run a computer. Today, the FTC filed a lawsuit against the company, claiming Intel has used its dominance to illegally block its competitors. Intel calls the government's case misguided. Coming up next, honoring a towering figure from America's past. We end tonight with a monumental project to honor the culture and heritage of the American Indian. A memorial to one of the most famous of all is being carved out of a mountain in South Dakota. And they've been at it now for more than half a century. As Mark Strassman tells us, this endeavor is a true example of the American spirit.
In South Dakota's Black Hills, a mountain foreman named Cass Jilkowski can finally see it. His family's dream taking shape. In size and scale, it's the most mammoth mountain sculpture in the world. An outsized replica of this statue of Crazy Horse, the Lakota Indian chief who wiped out Custer's men at Little Bighorn. When finished, it'll stretch 641 feet long, rise 563 feet tall, almost 8 feet higher than the Washington Monument. All one man's towering vision, not Cass, but his father. In 1947, a local chief convinced sculptor Kortchuk Jilkowski to create a lasting memorial to American Indians.
What a canvas I've got.
Kortchuk's willpower and ego were both as big as his mountain.
Of course I'm egotistical. I believe I can do it. I know I can do it.
He was a visionary, a man that believed, I can do this. And here it is, 6 years later, getting done.
Kortchuk worked at his vision until he died in 1982. With Kortchuk gone, many skeptics assumed his family would pack it in. Instead, they dug in and proved they were here to stay. They decided to finish the chief's head first, a relatively smaller job than his horse's head. It took 10 years,
but people could see progress for miles around.
Over the decades, blasting and drilling away 7 million tons of rock chiseled the Chief into focus.
You see it? Yeah.
Guests and private donors have paid for every dime of this project. 7 of Korchak's 10 children still work on this family's dream. How much longer to finish? 50 years? 100?
This is what he looked like when he was 23.
Their mother, Korchak's widow, refuses to guess.
Doesn't matter when it's finished. What matters is that the work never stops and you stick with it till it's done.
This family made a commitment to America's Indians. They intend to honor it, however long it takes. Mark Strassman, CBS News, Crazy Horse, South Dakota.
It's amazing. And that is the CBS Evening News for tonight. I'm Katie Couric. Thanks for watching. I'll see you tomorrow. Good night.